be under no illusion that this week is a big one for Rishi Sunak. And it all comes down to how the budget gets received. Because there are a ton of different problems, there are a ton of different things of how this could all turn out. And we don't know how it will go. That is the pure thing. Until the budget is read out, until it gets digested, I really don't think we'll get a proper verdict on how people are going to think about it until maybe Friday, maybe even the following Monday. Because I think it's got to be looked at, digested, and thought of how to act. Now, certainly on the Labour side of things, we've already seen that, saying that Rishi Sunak's decisions, along with Jeremy Hunt, are not necessary, that we could go bigger on the windfall tax and raise over at least £50 billion alone. And as we've said before, there are economists, all kinds of people saying, look, there are alternatives to this austerity regime that, Sunak and Hunt want to try and implement. And they are going to be desperately as well to try and say, oh, look at all these tax rises. See, it's not just all doom and gloom, as Jeremy Hunt came out and said just this morning. I don't know. I think when you're getting, from what we can see, a lot of, social spending and sort of service cuts, Hunt's came out and said, you're potentially not going to get any more money for the next 2 years. And if you're a vital public service that people constantly use, well, you're in for a tough ride, because inflation has squeezed your budget. And now the government said, well, you're not getting any more money for the next 2 years. Sorry, bye. That could be what happens. I do suspect that is highly what could be what happens. And of course, we've talked about the dilemma that Rishi Sunak faces, the red wall and his blue wall. The blue wall being the Tory heartlands, the sort of the traditional support and voting base for the Tories is under threat. And the more Sunak sort of goes and tries to favour them, the more he loses the red wall. And as we have expressed a lot of times, even going back to the Johnson era, that Boris Johnson himself was having increased difficulties at trying to walk this tightrope. Because the more he talked and tried to favour the red wall, the more he would lose the blue wall. And then if he would try and tip back, he would start to lose the red wall. So it was this constant balancing act that he had to face. And Sunak now faces that as well. But he has an even worse problem. Because we already talked about how Gavin Williamson's departure would cause huge problems for Sunak, because he's now lost his big, tough, hard man who would go out and talk to those MPs and try and, make sure that there was some, order within the party. He's lost him now. He's no longer in the cabinet. And Suella Braverman also being targeted still as well. But who is targeting them? Well, this seems to be certainly revenge for the regicide, because both Williamson and Braverman were big Boris Johnson supporters who ultimately were themselves responsible for not putting Johnson back in. It was supposedly Braverman being sort of, shall we say, being sweet-talked by Gavin Williamson to backing Rishi Sunak. So this does seem to be revenge by targeting these two. And you cannot help but think that this seems to be heavily targeted at the time when these accusations came out. So Rishi Sunak not only has to deal with that balancing act, but he has to deal with that sheer anger of those MPs. And one of the things, I've been saying to you all, I've been having a more and more sort of looking at what conservative sources have been saying about this fight. And it's been very, very interesting that they are massively talking up the blue wall while completely ignoring the red wall. It's almost if they are already acknowledging, yet we've lost the red wall. So let's just focus on our traditional Tory heartlands. So that is a very, very interesting admission. But Rishi Sunak has big problems. Certainly, he has softened his approach to Brexit and negotiations, as we've seen with Northern Ireland. But even then, Northern Ireland Protocol bill that's in the House of Lords seems to have been so amended, it's very likely not going to get passed in its sort of original form. And the government may just drop it altogether if these negotiations that do look like they are succeeding do work. But then you've got the problem of the DUP will still not go back into Stormont because there is a border in the Irish Sea. So a lot of Conservatives don't really seem to be paying too much attention to, which is a big problem. And of course, the more and more this fury about this almost betrayal about Brexit comes along, and we've said it before, Brexiteers love to be betrayed. They are at the same time both betrayers and the betrayees. They've betrayed every single prime minister they have served under in some way, shape, or form. And remember that before Johnson left, the narrative that Johnson was not being, well, at least was not fulfilling Brexit was started to being spun. So it is very likely that we could see that similar narrative now appear against Rishi Sunak. Because if he sort of tries and solves the Northern Ireland issue while not sort of appeasing the DUP, but upsetting a lot of the Brexiteers by certainly keeping the European Court of Justice in sort of regards to sort of the Northern Ireland issue. They remain in the single market customs union, which again, as we've said before, if you look economically, take London out of the equation, it is one of the UK's best performing regions. It being in the single market customs union is predominantly that exact reason. And of course, Brexiteers have been arguing since day one they want to try and pull Ireland out of that because they do not want to have and see those comparisons. So the Brexiteers are certainly going to be up in arms. And then you've got those red wall MPs who may, out of sheer spite, after they see the budget, know full well that that they are going to go back to their constituents that weekend and probably get absolutely hammered. They may just go, well, you know what? Let's go for a general election out of sheer spite. I'm going to lose my seat, so you know what? A couple of other Tories can lose their seat as well. That may very well be the case. And remember, Jake Berry, the guy who leads the Northern sort of research group and in charge of these Red Wall MPs, was a big supporter of Liz Truss. So they're not going to be, I suspect, too in favor of Rishi Sunak and what he might do with his budget. It's all to play for this week for Rishi Sunak, and it really is a massive sink or swim moment for him. But even if he manages to swim, the budget and many of his future policies are going to be an absolute millstone around his neck. So while he may find himself being able to tread water at the moment with the budget, the more sort of, stones are going to be heaped around his neck, and his ability to be able to swim will be lessened even more because Tory anger is going to grow exponentially, I highly suspect, as well as the public pressure to go for a general election. And we could be seeing a scenario that I've talked about before, that just sheer pressure alone could force the Tories just to say, well, we're going to lose anyway. we might as well lose now rather than later. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a notification link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. And of course, we'll see you all next time.